Welcome to the History of Early Life video lesson. In this lesson, we'll be talking about the theory of spontaneous generation, how it was disproved. We'll talk about Oparin's hypothesis, and we'll end up talking about the famous Miller-Urey experiment. So how did life begin? For many centuries, people believed in spontaneous generation. That is, that organisms could spontaneously arise from non-living matter. They witnessed flies coming from rotten meat, or frogs coming out of the mud, or mice from dirty cloth. This led them to believe that life could come from non-living matter. Others believed in biogenesis, that is, that all life comes from pre-existing life. Genesis in the beginning, and as you know, bio-life. Louis Pasteur's broth experiment proved that spontaneous generation was incorrect and proved biogenesis. In his famous broth experiment, Pasteur had broth that sat for a year without spoiling and was not contaminated. He had another flask that sat for a year without spoiling until the neck of the flask broke off, and then it spoiled overnight. Of course, this proved that there were living organisms in the air that caused things to grow and or decay. We now know, of course, that they are bacteria. It did leave one question, though. Where did the first living thing come from? Origin of the first living thing. Oparin's hypothesis was that early Earth's atmosphere had no free oxygen. Many experiments were performed to try to produce organic chemicals from inorganic ones, abiotically. All failed. Alexander Oparin, a Soviet biochemist, proposed that the problem was atmospheric oxygen. It was destroying the chemicals as fast as they were being made. His paper was largely ignored because Soviet science in the Stalin years was heavily influenced by politics and was thought to be largely inaccurate. However, Oparin's hypothesis was supported by the Miller-Urey experiment, where they produced, abiotically, large quantities of organic monomers from inorganic compounds, in the presence of an energy source and in the absence of oxygen. Let's take a look at this setup. So over here we have a flask that has water in it, and it's added heat to it, and it's boiled, and this of course imitates water vapor being produced by our oceans, which comes up here and forms cloud, water vapor. Injected into this were other chemicals like methane, nitrogen, to produce a primitive atmosphere that ended up in this flask over here. So this flask imitates the primitive atmosphere of early Earth. No oxygen available. These two cathode and anode produced a spark which imitated lightning. And what happened was that on the surface of this flask, okay, and then as it cooled, this returned to water and was a collecting trap, right? And what this proved was that in 3 days, all amino acids and materials necessary for life are contained in the soup that appeared blood red and then black. Okay, and this would be the soup down here in this collecting trap. In addition to that, the outside of this flask, rather the inside of it, but on the inside covering of the flask, was black. Well, what did it contain? It contained 20 different amino acids. It contained DNA, RNA, and ATP. And it contained fatty acids, glycerol, and simple sugars. These monomers polymerize spontaneously in the presence of inorganic catalysts such as zinc. When dissolved in water, they spontaneously form shells that are virtually identical to cell membranes. Very significant find in the history of science. Okay, let's take a look next at a video that will continue to discuss this topic on the origin of the first living thing and early life on Earth.